Well, again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's event. My name is Kevin Burns. I'm the mayor of Geneva, Illinois, and chairman of the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus Environment Committee. This morning, we are talking about recycling beyond municipal solid waste programs, or as we like to call it in dramatic fashion, beyond the bin. Just a quick reminder, folks, this Thursday, March 17th, we have an event regarding Soul Smart. So if you're interested, our friend Cheryl has put in the chat information regarding that. But regarding our meeting this morning, as all of you know, our communities are all working to run effective recycling programs, but there are a lot of challenges that we face, again, beyond the bin. Primarily, our economy does not prioritize waste reduction. Instead, I think all of you would agree, it tends to encourage continuous consumption of new products. Another problem, product packaging. It can confuse many consumers. They wish cycle or put things in the bin that they hope can be recycled, but they can't. And those items end up contaminating the recycling stream and, of course, lowering the value of those commodities. Manufacturers currently do not have much responsibility at all for the packaging and paper products they create. Instead, the public sector is left to manage these materials at the end of their useful life. In recent years, markets for recyclable materials have fallen dramatically. We all know that China has refused to accept shipments of contaminated recyclable materials in 2018, and those challenges of, quote, shipping our materials elsewhere continue to grow. And finally, local restaurants and businesses don't necessarily or consistently recycle. This confuses and frustrates consumers, and I would argue it also frustrates the restaurateurs who want to do the right thing. But many questions of integrity of recycling programs overall, of course, exist. And while we know there are so many upstream obstacles to effective recycling that are beyond the control of our own municipal solid waste programs, our speakers today will help us understand better how policies and markets can complement municipal recycling efforts. So we're going to have an overview of the EPA's circular economy, folks, a strategy series and how you can join the effort. And we have with us today our friend Chris Newman, an environmental scientist with the United States EPA. He is an international solid waste and recycling specialist who focuses on electronic waste and sustainability projects. He focuses so much on electronic waste that he still has a rotary dial phone. That's a joke. Chris will talk about the EPA's new National Recycling Strategy, which was just released in November. And it's the first in a series of strategies to build a circular economy for all. Chris, the floor is yours, man.
All right. Well, thank you, Mayor Burns. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. And
do you still have a rotary dial phone, Chris?
I had one at my old house. Actually, no, we've got a push button, old push button. We did have an old one, old rotary at our old house, but that's been a few years.
Yes.
So, but phones, everybody's moved on to the iPhone. So I do have it set on an old timey ring.
Good.
Let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right. You should be able to see my opening slide. All right, yes. Great. Well, yes. Thanks to Edith and Cheryl and Mayor Burns for having EPA on to present to you all today and talk about some of the new things that we have going on here at EPA, a move to a circular economy that is being supported by our national recycling strategy that we have been developing over the last year or two. Circular economy is a new term for many people. It is not as linear as, which is kind of implied, I guess, as the take, make, and waste model that we have, or the recycle, reduce, reuse, recycle model that we have. It's something that has come to us with some support from Congress, and they have defined in the Save Our Seas Act 2.0 that the circular economy is an economy that uses a systems-focused approach and involves industrial processes and economic activities that are restorative or regenerative by design, enable resources to be used in processes and activities so that we keep their highest value for as long as possible. So we're not doing a lot of downcycling, for example, with that. And we're eliminating waste through improved design for materials, for products, and systems and business models. So I just wanted to start off with that because we'll be getting into a little bit more depth on that, and it's good to have that definition for people that might be new to the circular economy. All right, so why is EPA moving to a circular economy? Why are we developing a series of approaches for different materials and business models for circular economy? The first part is that we started developing in 2019 and 2020 our national recycling strategy. And we got comments basically that the circular economy is something that's going on somewhat nationally, but also quite a bit internationally. And we need to be getting on board. We've also received comments from Congress that we need to reframe our linear reduce, reuse, recycle model into a more circular model that gets to the importance of how materials can be managed in our modern times, and how we need to be looking at how we manage resources as well, because the circular economy is able to really touch on both of those aspects. It broadens the work that we do in our program of the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act and Solid Waste Management, and makes recycling one part of a larger program that takes a look at things like purchasing of recycled materials, how we can refurbish and reuse materials without even having to take them through to that recycling phase. So it really broadens the scope of how we work. And it also is making a highlight and a connection between how we use our materials and climate change and environmental justice. One of the numbers that was in an EPA Sustainable Materials Management report from about 10 years ago indicated that about 42% of greenhouse gases generated in the US come from the provision of materials and goods. So by adjusting how we use our materials and how we purchase and how we recycle, we can affect the generation of climate change gases. And then also there's the environmental justice impact of waste management as well as resource extraction. So what we're looking to do with this strategy is to find a way forward and put that out there for the nation over the next 10 years as a guide to how we can manage our materials, but also how we can also use our statutory authorities at the agency to help move things forward as well. So a little bit about the circular economy strategies that we'll be working on over the coming year or two. Right now, we're in the first part, which is developing the national recycling strategy. We'll be taking a look at plastics and food waste farther down the road, critical minerals and electronics. And then the built environment, which is a lot of how we build our homes, how we take materials from demolition and construction projects and prepare them for reuse. And then finally, textiles. And a little bit here about circular economy and an example of a renewable and a finite material path chain. For the finite material path chain, for example, we're talking about how we can not just reuse and reduce materials, but how we can share materials, maybe through lending libraries for tools, how we can maintain and use our materials and products longer than we may be using the current generation. Where are opportunities for reuse, and how do we connect those people that are going to need materials or products with people that have them that are done using them? And then finally, we move into the refurbishment or remanufacturing and the recycling of it. When we look at the renewable side, we're talking about the generation of wastes, maybe an organic waste that can go off to anaerobic digestion or composting, and then becomes part of the farming chain, maybe becomes a soil amendment that new materials are grown from. So that's kind of a quick run through of the circular economy. And overall, as it says, we're trying to minimize that system leakage and those negative externalities all the way along. Some of the wider goals of the circular economy, we want to reduce those domestic and international climate impacts. That's a large part of it. A lot of energy goes into extracting and processing materials just to get it to the point where we can start putting it into our products. And then those social inequities that also come from extraction and natural resource processing, because they can be very energy intensive. They can also be very polluting. And if we can reduce the amount of material that we use through a circular economy, we can also reduce ecosystem loss and destruction while stimulating economic development. There are quite a few studies out there that show how by recycling something, we can create more jobs than we would if we were to just landfill materials. Looking a little deeper at our national recycling strategy, we're going to be taking a look at the municipal solid waste recycling stream. This is the Curbside Collection program. We are looking to identify stakeholder-led actions that can be used to create a stronger, more resilient and equitable municipal recycling system that's also cost-effective. Different communities have challenges for costs for collection, for example, based on distance to a material recovery facility that can make or break an entire program. So how can we find ways to optimize collection in those communities so that they're able to recycle their materials as well? And we know that recycling itself is not going to be able to get us to a circular economy. We need to have policies in place, for example, that promote the purchase of recycled products, recycled materials, or promote the reuse and repair of materials and products instead of just going out and purchasing new all the time. So you're kind of changing some of that work that we've done in the past and moving to something that puts a little bit more thought into how we might be using our materials and looks for new opportunities as well. And then the agency at the same time will also be looking and developing additional strategies, as I mentioned before, on material reuse and reduction, food waste, plastics, and electronics. There are a lot of challenges right now to the US recycling systems. I'm sure many of you are aware, and we'll probably be hearing more about those challenges from our later speakers as well. Recycling infrastructure is inadequate in many communities. The material recovery facility might be 20 years old, for example. It may be set up for a waste stream and a packaging stream that's from the mid-1990s or the early 2000s. Packaging and waste is constantly changing. So the MRFs need to be up to date on how they sort and separate their materials, and they need to be able to handle the current volumes of materials that are coming in. And they need to be able to prepare those materials so that they can meet the demands of the materials market, so that those materials can become part of the next generation of products. Consumers are also challenged on what is recyclable. I think it was mentioned in Mayor Burns' introduction about wish cycling. That certainly happens. And we need to get people educated so that they have a good understanding of what's recyclable and what things shouldn't be recyclable, so that we don't have contamination of the material stream, but also we don't have worker risk. We don't have risk to workers from contagious diseases from a dirty baby diaper that somehow ends up in the recycling bin, maybe because somebody didn't read. I don't quite know how they get there, but they end up in the recycling stream. From someone's medical needles used to administer medicines at home. Sometimes those detergent bottles that people will use to collect their sharps end up inside the material recovery facility, which presents a big hazard to workers. So if we can cut down on those and cut down on the amount of plastic bags that clog up the equipment, recyclers will have a pretty good chance of producing a much cleaner recycling stream. And then also we will be taking a look and dealing with this environmental justice challenge of exporting materials and where materials are managed so that no one is impacted by someone else's wastes. So like I mentioned, we want to be taking a look at how we can improve those markets through improved purchasing of recovered and recycled materials. It can be something just as simple as making sure that your copy paper has recycled content, or if there's recycled content paper with increased recycled content, that would also be even a great first start. Taking a look at improving those collection programs and how materials are managed, reducing that contamination, finding additional policies that support circularity so that it's part of your thought process when going out there with purchases, and standardizing that measurement and increasing data collection. Right now, there's a lot of data collected, but people are not always talking apples and oranges. What we've seen from our work is that some states will have a particular term that they use for material or a particular way that they describe a collection system, and that's not compatible with what is the language in another state. So we're not able to get good information on how much is actually collected and we're not able to get good information about where the problems are. So if we can standardize measurement and increase data collection, we can get better information about where there are opportunities to increase the efficiency in the system. Digging a little bit deeper into the communication side and reducing contamination, we're going to be doing some work to develop messaging and educational materials for people so that they understand the value of recycling. I think everybody has the basic idea, but we need to let people understand the bigger, larger world importance of recycling and know specific things that can happen by positively recycling. Making sure that people are able to provide a more consistent stream of materials and educate the public in various pilot programs so that these educational campaigns can be tested, and then we can roll them into a larger national program. And then find ways that we can use new media types like social media, the industry that's involved now, like our MRFs and waste haulers, and even local governments, to help get the word out to their stakeholders and communities about the importance of recycling, how to recycle properly, and then how to purchase products with recycled content, and address those label challenges that are out there. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the chasing arrows. There's a lot of discussion around them about what they really mean. Those chasing arrows with the number mean they provide information about the plastic type, not necessarily if it's recyclable. There are other labels out there, like the how to recycle label, for example. It's one of several that tell consumers how they can treat different parts of the package. For example, a frozen dinner entree may have 3 pieces of packaging within an outer box, a tray, and then a wrap on top. And the labeling will tell the person how to handle each particular part of that package so that it doesn't become a contaminant in someone's recycling stream. And then we'll also be taking a look and developing plans to see how we can assist state and local governments to address this contamination issue, because it is one of our bigger challenges with recycling. And like I mentioned, with the labeling, here's an example of those chasing arrows that have been around for decades. They tell people what the resin are, but they don't always tell people how to prevent wish cycling. They may think or want to see that a particular piece of plastic is recyclable when it's marked, but it's not necessarily that way based on how the markets are set up. And we'll also be taking a look at how we can improve consistency for these labels for recyclable products and on the recycling bin, because recycling does change community by community based on who their hauler is and who their material recovery facility is and how they're set up. So more consistent ways of communication and even equipping the MRFs will be helpful in addressing these issues. So we are looking for assistance with this. We have a few things going on right now. We're asking communities to help join the effort to provide input, but also to be a part of some of the tasks that we have. You can go to the website epa.gov/recycling strategy to get a look and download our national recycling strategy, the current version of that. But also, as you look farther onto the webpage, you'll see information about how your community can join the strategy and sign up for particular tasks, either as a leader for a task or as someone that's going to help support a task as it gets developed. One of the great things about this approach that we're taking is we're using efforts and assistance from a lot of communities around the country to help get this done, because ultimately local governments have a really good sense of how their community operates, and we need that input so that we can design a program that works very well nationally and works for a lot of communities. We'll be taking input from that national recycling strategy, developing our future strategies, and input from stakeholders to develop that strategy. Even if there's a particular idea that you think might be something to take a look at, communities can also propose new actions for consideration. So again, that's epa.gov/recycling strategy. And it's a very simple sign-up sheet. Like I mentioned, you can either lead or support. And here's an example of market development workshops, for example. You can sign up to lead, or you can sign up to support any of the actions that are part of the strategy. And you can also go onto the website and see who else has signed up, to see if there are other groups that you work with. So a few final comments. We are really taking an emphasis on this to take a look at the social aspects with material extraction, recycling, and disposal in a way that we haven't, and I certainly haven't seen in my years at the agency. We're really being very forward and acknowledging the challenges that recycling faces. And we've got a great tie-in from Congress to the Save Our Seas Act 2.0 so that we can help address ocean plastics as part of the strategy as well. And then we've also received funding from Congress. We've got somewhere around $275 million that will be available in grants over the next 5 years to help communities with recycling. We're still working right now on putting together the grant solicitation. So once that's out, I'll be able to send that on to Edith and Cheryl to disseminate that. And then also, we've got a big problem with lithium batteries and all the challenges that they pose. So we'll be developing labeling and best practices for that. So with that, I'm able to take any questions, or we can move on to the next speaker, however you'd like to proceed.
Actually, Chris, thank you very much. We do have a couple of questions. In fact, I believe our friend Marcella from Oak Park has posted 2. And I think we have another one. Cheryl, I'm going to ask you to help me out and read those things. Otherwise, we can invite those who ask the questions to simply pose them verbally if they'd like.
Okay, yeah, so Marcella asked, there have been news stories about structural issues with recycling. That is that the value of reclaimed materials and China's refusal to import US waste. How is this being addressed?
So markets are interesting. Markets change on a dime, and we have seen things change. I've heard just a few weeks ago that and Walter might know a little bit more about this than I do, probably watches them more closely than I do, but the value of some plastics like high density polyethylene, like a natural milk jug that you would buy at the grocery store, the value of those have increased quite a bit based on material supplies and where there are demands for other products that can be made from that same petroleum product. So it's pretty interesting to see what has happened with the market. And part of the reason why we are taking this change is because we're not able to, in my view, we're not able to sustain a lot of changes like what we saw with the National Sword. It really threw recycling in the US a big loop, really threw recycling for a big loop, because all of a sudden markets that would take anything were just shut down. So we have seen more facilities being opened up in the US to take, we've seen quite a few recycled fiber content facilities open up in the US to fill that need for fiber that the world has that China was able to fulfill, but close their doors to. So.
Okay, thanks. And we have an additional question. Is the EPA pursuing the manufacturer take-back programs common in Europe?
At this point, we're not. We're certainly talk about them and engage in discussions with them. But at this point, as I understand it, that would require a direction from Congress to be able to do. At this point, our program looks primarily at regulating waste. We're not able to get into product stewardship in that particular way, although we certainly do engage with it.
Okay, thanks. And then it looks like Edith just wanted to clarify for the last question. Could you explain National Sword for those that aren't familiar with that?
Yeah, sure thing. Sure thing. Thanks for that clarifying question. So National Sword is a regulatory effort that China put into place probably about 5 years, maybe 6 years ago now. China would take any containers of any type of waste. It seems like they were known for taking a lot of plastics, a lot of electronics, would let them into the country, and there they would be recycled. There were various things that weren't always correctly recycled. We saw a lot of examples with electronics where people would pick the best components, the gold-based microchips, for example, and then leave the leaded cathode ray tube glass behind in a river, or wires would be burned to recover the copper, things like that. They had eventually had enough of the pollution that was being created from this kind of recycling, and they stopped waste imports, almost overnight.
Okay, thanks. And it looks like Walter Willis has a question, if you wanted to ask that.
Sure, Walter.
Chris.
Hey, Walter.
So with California passing the legislation on the recycling labeling, basically you have to earn the chasing arrows on your packaging so that the consumer is not confused. What do you think? That seems like a national thing. Are you guys taking any leadership? Are you getting any direction? I don't know if there's any bills in Congress right now, but I know I've alerted Senator Durbin's staff to that. This might be a national issue, that, even though, very rarely does the federal government jump into this type of stuff. But just curious where the US EPA is at.
Yeah, it's something we're aware of, and we talk about. It'll be interesting to see how the examples that I mentioned about labeling and what our efforts are with the National Recycling Strategy are influenced and affected by that. As California goes, they're a very large part of the US market. One of the things that I am interested to see how will play out is that in some states, those chasing arrows are required to be on products, and California is now changing that game up. The other thing that'll be interesting to see over the next few months is, it's my understanding the Federal Trade Commission will be revising and releasing a new version of their green guides, which has a lot of information about product labeling and how sustainability and recycled material and recyclability claims are made. So we'll see if the Federal Trade Commission weighs in on this as well. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how other states play with those requirements and how manufacturers handle it.
Okay, thanks. And I think we have time for just one more question, and then we'll have to save other questions for the end or in the chat. The last question is, are there any plans to address plastic pollution in lakes and rivers?
So through the Save Our Seas Act 2.0, there has been some action with the Great Lakes, and it's built all of us at EPA's awareness of the plastic waste issue. And in our office in Region 5, we're working with Mississippi River Group that is addressing plastic waste in the Mississippi River as well. So there is some inland waters actions in there that we're starting to undertake as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks. And thanks for your presentation. And then if there are additional questions, we'll be able to answer those in the end or at the chat. So I'll let Mayor Burns take over again.
Right,
thank you, Chris, very much. Folks, we're going to discuss next the Illinois Packaging and Paper Products Recycling Legislation. And we have two very distinguished guests who are going to lead us through this discussion and presentation. First, the Executive Director of the Solid Waste Agency of Lake County since 2007 is our buddy Walter Willis. And prior to joining SWALCO, as it's known, Mr. Willis was a consultant in the waste industry for 20 years. He developed solid waste management plans and waste facilities throughout the United States. Our other presenter is Sydney Harris. And Sydney is the Policy and Programs Manager at the Product Stewardship Institute, otherwise known as PSI. Before joining PSI, Sydney worked in Seattle on Puget Sound policy at an environmental nonprofit. She also worked as a research fellow with the US EPA's Ocean Pollution and Trash-Free Waters programs. Sydney's coming to us this morning from beautiful New Hampshire, by the way. Both Sydney and Walter will talk about extended producer responsibility legislation for the reuse and recycling of packaging and paper products. With that, Walter and Sydney, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Burns. So this is something that's been going on for about 30 years in other parts of the country, or the world, that is. This idea that the brand owners who put the packaging out there that we have to deal with and try to figure out should have some responsibility for helping recover that. So it's Europe and Canada. So a big breakthrough last year when 2 states, and Sydney will go through this, did pass legislation that would shift the cost. I say it's a paradigm shift because to really bring those costs into their balance sheets means that they will start to design for recyclability with their packaging and the environment to reduce their costs, right? So we let the free market work in that way. And if you have traveled throughout the state of Illinois, there's various access to recycling programs. You go to some of our rural counties, we have very few programs, if any. No drop off, very few curbside. Well, that would change under this legislation. The responsible party, or the producer responsible organization, or PRO we call them, would have to stand up programs or reimburse entities like that I represent, municipalities that have programs. So this is a big game changer. Ballpark number based on a study done in the state of Washington on what it would cost the producers to stand up programs in that state, just kind of doing the math with the same population, it's around $400 million that would have to be invested every year to either reimburse programs like we have with our municipal programs or to stand up new programs throughout the state of Illinois. So we formed a core team to fund the work of PSI, the city of Chicago, DuPage County, my agency SWALCO, and also SWANK are funding this. We've engaged Metro mayors, obviously, because this is a direct savings to your ratepayers or to the municipalities. Some municipalities still fund their programs through general fund or a property tax. This would be a direct savings to the ratepayers of $7 to $8 a month, would be redirected to the brand owners. So it's very important for us as we build this legislation, which we hope to have public in a couple of months, that we have local government support. And that's why this presentation is very important, because it will not be an easy piece of legislation then to enact, to shift those types of costs to the brand owners. Now, we are seeing a lot of change in their attitude. There are a lot of brand owners like Nestle, Mars, Unilever, et cetera, that are totally on board with this. The plastics problem is driving the circular economy discussion and EPR support. So this is something that's not going to go away. It's just going to strengthen. We built a coalition, we hope, of local government, the environmental community, and the retail merchants. So the city of Aurora is engaged with us, West Cook County, Will County, the Illinois Retail Merchants, Illinois Environmental Council, Environment Illinois, Illinois PIRG, US PIRG, Illinois EPA, Metropolitan Mayors, Mayor Burns himself, and Representative Avalar. We've got a pretty strong group of stakeholders working on this legislation. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sydney, who's going to walk through this a little more expertly. Sydney is, I would consider, the leading expert on what's going on throughout our country on EPR legislation, and she's been very, very valuable to our effort to develop Illinois legislation that is top-notch, well thought out, and very comprehensive. So Sydney, take it away.
Wow, thanks, Walter. And thank you, Mayor Burns. You two should introduce me everywhere I go.
Yeah. Well, Sydney, you wrote that for us, so hopefully we read it properly. So.
I think our comms team wrote that
Yeah.
for you, but yes, I appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Can you all see my slides? Can you see this? Okay, wonderful. I'll take it away then. So quick, just little explainer about who PSI is, just for all of you, in case you're not familiar. We're a national nonprofit. We're a little bit of an interesting organization, though, as far as nonprofits go. We are structured such that our board of directors and our membership nationwide is state and local government agencies, mostly environmental agencies or solid waste agencies, sometimes departments of public health, though, and it could be anybody. And then we also have over 100 partners who are anybody who's not a state or local government, basically. So those could be recyclers or NGOs or academic institutions, international governments as well, producers, anybody that supports product stewardship and wants to join the conversation. And so we function like that because our whole shtick really is bringing together multiple types of stakeholders in mediated policy discussion. So that's exactly kind of the process Walter described. We try to bring together everybody who needs to be in the room and should be part of these discussions because they will be affected by the policy. And then we craft policy with them so that we have buy-in and everybody can support it and we reach consensus on really key policy issues. So that's kind of what we do in a very tiny nutshell. We work on all the consumer products you can think of. So electronics, mattresses, medical sharps, some of the things I've heard mentioned just today, and then of course on packaging. And so I'm really glad that we got an overview of the circular economy because now I can kind of skip to the good part. we believe EPR is the centerpiece of the circular economy. And it's not just us. You know, we hear businesses, as Walter is mentioning, multinational companies, and also lots and lots of other types of stakeholders recognizing that you really need product stewardship as the foundation of a circular economy to make it happen, to level the playing field, and to make sure everybody participates equitably. So what am I talking about here with EPR? Extended producer responsibility, or EPR, is a type of product stewardship that is mandatory by law. So there's the umbrella of product stewardship that can be lots of voluntary things. It could be companies voluntarily making their packaging recyclable, for example. That's nice, but we need everybody involved, and we need it to be mandatory if we're really going to get to a circular economy that is robust. So that's why we focus on EPR, which is a law that extends producers' responsibility that could be financial and also management responsibility in both directions from the producer. So upstream to product design and downstream to what happens to all the waste that comes from their stuff post-consumer. And again, that could be on anything, any type of consumer product or material you could really imagine. In the US, there are 124. We're so close to 125. The Oregon governor is about to sign one more law, but right now, I think as of today, still technically 124 laws, EPR laws, that is, in the US on 15 different products, spanning 33 different states and Washington, DC. You can see Illinois right in the middle there. In terms of the number of EPR laws that are in place, including a couple local laws. So the laws that you have in Illinois are for mercury auto switches, for electronics, which has been amended a number of times, for mercury thermostats, and then again, Cook County has a local law for pharmaceuticals. And there is a lot of action in Illinois in the legislature to get more EPR laws in place. So there have been 17 different unique EPR bills introduced in Illinois across 7 different product areas. You can see them here. I won't list them all out. Just this year, there have been bills on carpet, packaging, paint, pharmaceuticals, solar panels, and wind turbine blades. It's a EPR bonanza, basically. And on packaging, as Walter mentioned, which is my focus area, it is just really exploding across the US. There is tremendous interest and momentum for packaging EPR. And Walter already mentioned, you know, there are 2 new laws, the first 2 on the books for packaging in the US, in Oregon and Maine. They both passed last summer. There have been at least 18 bills this session across the US and counting, not counting like same as bills. So there's a lot of interest in all these states for packaging EPR. And there is, I want to mention, a federal bill that was first introduced in 2020, I want to say, possibly 2019, but I think 2020, called the Federal Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. That would actually be the direction that I think US EPA would need to kind of allow the agency to work on EPR. So if you want EPA to start working on EPR, then we need the BFF-PPA. That was just a fun game to see how many acronyms I could put into one sentence. It has a lot going on in that bill, including a national EPR program for packaging, but also a national bottle bill, a national bag ban and fees on paper bags and stuff like that. There's other single-use plastics bans. There's some really strong environmental justice provisions. There's a lot going on in that bill. And I do think realistically, maybe pieces of it will get taken out and sort of introduced as their own pieces of legislation. But again, I think that's what EPA would need, in my opinion, is a national law that would enable them to be sort of the agency working on EPR. In the meantime, we are doing it at the state level. So I don't need to tell you again the packaging problem. I'll just glance over this quickly and then you know, we can move on from here. But we've got too much packaging. It is super complex. There's a lot of contamination and consumer confusion, and we have a lot of market disruption. So the markets are super volatile. This is part of why EPR has been spreading around the world, but it actually has been around for packaging for over 30 years in Europe and over like 15 to 20 years in Canada. EPR started in Southeast Asia and Europe in the very early 90s and then kind of as you can see from these maps, just kind of exploded all over the globe. And it really, for packaging, it wasn't until 2021 that the US got on the map. So we are really lagging behind the rest of the world on these policies. And we're only expecting them, as you can see here, to continue proliferating. Why? Because, well, they work. So we know they work. We can see from existing programs that have been around for decades that they do a really great job increasing recovery and recycling, that they provide sustainable funding or financing for the recycling system. And that translates, as Walter mentioned, to major savings for taxpayers and ratepayers and local governments. They invest in education and new infrastructure. So they are the source of funding that we need for modernizing that aging, crumbling infrastructure that we've got going on right now. They provide green sector jobs, because we know more recycling creates more jobs than, increased, say, landfilling or other ways we could manage materials. And they create a network of accountability, which is the paradigm shift that Walter was talking about. And that's the really major thing that EPR laws do, is beyond all the funding, they are the only type of policy tool that really forces the people who put the stuff on the market into the equation to have to actually think about the consequences of that. So they internalize those externalities, and that's what they're designed to do. They also create a lot of potential for better products with fewer life cycle impacts. They incorporate financial incentives to better design, packaging or products. And the ground has been plowed. Like we just saw, there's EPR for packaging all over the world. There's increasing momentum. We've got 2 laws now in the US. In Illinois and elsewhere in the US, we know EPR works for other products. So, we've got a lot of experience with this. I don't want you to take my word for it, though. These are just a couple of examples of some EPR programs that people may have heard of because they kind of get mentioned a lot. So I thought I'd break it down for you. Belgium is one of the older EPR programs for packaging in the world. It's been around since 1994. Their, their packaging and paper products, that's PPP, recycling rate, not recovery rate, is at 92%. That means successfully sold to a viable end market. Their contamination rate is well below 10%. British Columbia in Canada, they have had a provincial program since 2014, so much newer than Belgium's, but their PPP recycling rate is also, I think, at 90%. It was the most recent number I saw. And again, that's actual recycling, not recovery, and their contamination is well below 10% as well. By comparison, in the US, our average PPP recycling rate is 50%, and it has been that number for 20 years. So we haven't improved on this number in the last 2 decades, while the rest of the world has gone ahead and passed EPR and skyrocketed their recycling rates. And our average contamination is over 25% across the US. That's just embarrassing. Like, that's pretty bad. But it's because consumers, they're really confused and they're getting mixed messages. And it's kind of like I always tell my mom, it's not your fault. You can't change this system as one consumer. It's too hard. So what we've done with Walter and with our other wonderful funders is we've gotten a group together, as Walter said, to work through PSI's EPR policy model to develop a bill for Illinois that can help you all out. These 16 boxes here are the 16 elements. That's just what PSI calls them. They're basically key components of a successful EPR policy. So we break down any EPR policy into these 16 components, and then we provide some detailed, example legislative language, and we break everything down conceptually, and we kind of walk through this pretty systematically with again, as many stakeholders as we can get involved. And so I just want to give you a quick overview of the process that we followed here. So you can see the funders at the top. Hopefully my little Zoom thing isn't hiding the logos for you all, but okay. So we started last October. We had a kickoff call with our core team of funders. And then by November, we had developed a project summary, which I tried uploading into the chat. So hopefully I think you can just actually download that straight from the chat. It's just a PDF. That talks about, why we're doing this, what's the problem, what's our process, what's our plan, who's involved. And we formed officially the Illinois EPR for PPP committee, and we got going. So, December through February of this year, we held 4 3-hour calls folks here who participated can attest, it is a slog, but it is necessary to get through this complex policy, content. We discussed all 16 key elements with the people on the committee on those calls. We then developed a bill draft based on our dialogue, and we're continuing to work on that bill draft to just kind of refine it and do finishing touches. And so we're working on finalizing that, resolving any outstanding issues, and then like on certain elements, like who exactly is the producer or what exact covered materials are there, like getting in the weeds, and then we'll be circulating that bill to the broader committee, making sure everybody's on board, and then continuing to present to folks like you and try to build out that coalition of supporters. So that's where we're at. I want to tell you now what's in the bill real quick, and then we can open it up for some more questions, but hopefully this will answer some of your questions off the bat. So the program is going to look kind of like this oversimplified diagram. So if you'll bear with me, you start over here. Let's say you're just a consumer ordering a vase from Vases Inc., which I dearly hope is not a real company because I'm using it as a name here. So you order this vase, it gets shipped to you by Vases Inc. in a bunch of packaging materials. This is what happens to those materials. I'll go through that in a minute, but I want to focus on the funding first. So when Vases Inc. sends you this vase, they choose all these packaging materials and for their vase, and then what happens is they have to pay fees on every material that they choose. So in this example, they have a cardboard box, those little like plastic air-filled pillows, and then styrofoam peanuts. This is just for example purposes. And sorry, I'm kind of losing my voice. So they pay fees on all these three materials. Where do those fees go? Not into thin air. They go to a PRO, a producer responsibility organization, which Vases Inc., along with hundreds of other responsible companies under this program, will form. Basically, it's going to be a nonprofit entity that helps kind of corral all the producers and keep them in compliance, and help collect the funds and distribute the funds. So the PRO will collect all these funds that Vases Inc. paid on these materials, and then they will distribute the funding throughout the system. As Walter mentioned, you as a municipality, maybe you're running your recycling system. So I put my cardboard box in the curbside bin, a truck came to get it, it went to a MRF, it got processed, it got pulped, it got turned right back into a box, because that's the ideal circular economy, right? Well, instead of you paying for all that, you turn around and get reimbursed for your costs by the PRO. So now you can provide that service for free to your residents, and the PRO is funding you to cover your costs. In addition, they're improving the infrastructure and expanding the services, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So it's not just they reimburse you for the total status quo, it's an improvement on the status quo. In some communities, they're going to provide service directly by directly working with haulers or MRFs, et cetera, where maybe there isn't already municipal recycling program in place, because we don't want to orphan those communities, right? Everybody should get the same standard of service around the state. They're also going to do some R&D. Over here, we got some, what do we do with these air-filled pillows? There's a little guy doing some research, because the PRO is going to start, I mean, this is hypothetical now, but they're going to start a separate pilot collection program for air-filled pillows, and maybe it's store take back, or maybe it's something else, or maybe they just need to re-examine how to redesign those because they realize there's nothing that can be done with them and they need to be using something else, right? So they're doing their R&D, that's all funded by them. They're also funding that consumer education on what to do with all these materials, so we don't get people putting these in the curbside bin, for example, right? So we need that clear, consistent consumer education. Again, improving and expanding infrastructure, developing markets is huge, and it's a big part of EPR programs that the producers need to fund. And they reimburse the state, of course, for any oversight and enforcement costs that they incur. So that was a very fast, like a quick and dirty overview of kind of how the program will work. I want to break a couple more things down for you. So what materials are covered under this law, right? Like, what are we even talking about? Well, it covers consumer packaging, paper products, which is basically printed paper. So like flyers, mailers, newspapers, magazines, that kind of thing. Single-use materials like straws or forks or clamshells, or including, things sold as products like a sleeve of Solo cups or a thing of paper plates or something. It exempts small businesses though, which is really important. This is not intended to be a burden on small businesses. So there is a lot of language in the bill establishing like thresholds and different kind of criteria for when you kind of qualify. And again, that reimbursement for recycling, which is, probably most important for all of you on the call today. So producers fund the recycling system. They don't fund landfill tipping fees. They're not funding the disposal of disposable things. However, they still pay into the system for any packaging they make or put on the market that isn't recyclable, which creates an incentive, a pretty strong incentive for them to switch that packaging to something recyclable because they don't want to pay into a system that they're not getting any benefit out of. They reimburse local governments like you all if you are running a recycling program. And again, there's a strong emphasis on making sure there's equitable statewide recycling access. So there's language in the bill right now that would have, making sure there must be recycling in all single and multifamily residences, state and local agencies, and public spaces. And there's kind of a threshold of 1,500 population for now, where if you're above that, then you have curbside. And if you're below that, maybe you have like a depot, because we know it's not always feasible to do curbside like every single place. So then government oversight and roles are really critical. The Illinois EPA will have the ultimate oversight enforcement role, as any state agency would have under any EPR program. They review 5-year program plans. The PRO will basically write a plan and submit it to the agency and say, here's how we're going to comply and run this program. And they have to get that approved before they can go ahead. They'll also report annually to the agency on how they're doing, and the agency will review those reports. All of that becomes public information, so those are public documents. And the agency, of course, gets reimbursed for their oversight expenses. And then local governments, as we've mentioned, continue operating recycling programs and maybe even expand services and get reimbursed. You're going to work with the PRO on educating the residents. So there's a strong language in there on like cost sharing and collaborating and making sure they're kind of consistent education plans, so we're not recreating the wheel and sending out mixed messages. And local governments will have a role serving on a multi-stakeholder advisory council, which the EPA will appoint. There's a whole list of like types of people that need to be represented on the council, and includes many different types of local governments by size and area and all that. And the idea there is to provide input into all aspects of the program. So before that program plan gets, submitted to the agency, advisory council is going to take a look, see what they think, write some comments, work with the PRO. Same thing about annual reports. They're going to, all their comments are going to be available to the agency as well. So they can basically go to the agency and say, look, we don't recommend that you approve this plan until these things are changed, or we think this is a great plan and you should go ahead and approve it. And whatever they think will be known to the EPA. So that's just a little bit about the governance. There are also, of course, really strong performance standards. So right now, the language we have is that by 2030, this is consistent with existing requirements. By 2030, there's 45% recycling rate mandatory. That's kind of across covered materials. By 2035, it goes up to 50%. That would be a big improvement on some of the current recycling rates in Illinois, so that's good. Proposed targets will also be required in that stewardship plan that the PRO will write. So they're going to, in addition to those kind of minimum targets, they're going to have to propose and then meet all these other kinds of targets: PCR content, reuse of materials, recovery, recycling, toxics reduction, emissions reductions from production and management of materials, transitions from single-use materials to refill and reuse materials. So they have to come up with how they're best going to meet all those goals, propose them, and then again, get them approved by the agency and then meet them. There are even more provisions for design for the environment. I just have a couple more slides and then I'll be all done. The PRO is going to provide technical assistance on reduction of covered materials, product redesign, and systems for reusable packaging to all of those participating producers, so that they can, the idea is to help them achieve the goals, right? Help them transition. The producers also have to minimize environmental and health impacts of all their covered materials, just kind of across the board. And the Illinois EPA would create a problematic materials list, is currently the language we're using, and that list would get updated frequently, and producers would need to minimize or eliminate use of anything on that list. So that could be like a PFAS or an additive, or a black plastic that's hard to sort, or something like that. There's also an explicit ban on certain toxic substances and ingredients that are commonly found in packaging materials. and financial incentives, really strong financial incentives on those fees that the producers pay for environmental outcomes. So they might pay more for something that's disposable than they would pay for something that's easily recyclable, for example. And then it will do even more for the environment. This is my last slide. The program will create a waste prevention and reuse fund and a composting infrastructure and education fund. Both funds would then be administered by the PRO and would be distributable as maybe grants or low interest loans to local governments, tribes, nonprofits, or sometimes private orgs if the agency approves of them and determines that the funds will be used for the public benefit. And both will also allow the PRO to make targeted direct investments into, either composting infrastructure and education or waste prevention and reuse. So I want to stop there. I mean, there's so much more in the bill, but I can't go over all of it. I want to leave some time for questions. So let me stop here, and my contact information is also here if you need it.
Well, Sydney, you are the inaugural winner of the most acronyms ever used in a presentation award. So thank you very much.
I know. I'm so sorry.
And of course, we'll be sending your award via all recyclable materials shortly. So.
Oh, perfect. Yes, thank you.
So, any questions or comments, Cheryl? I'm going to ask that you kindly direct those queries to our friend Sydney.
Yes, so we have a question. How does the responsibility by consumers for what is bought and enjoyed then factor into the EPR process?
Yeah, so good question. I mean, typically people ask, are the prices that the fees basically that producers pay going to be passed on to consumers, which I think is kind of what this question might be getting at. The answer is we don't in any existing packaging EPR program see prices increase on consumer goods from these programs. It's an economies of scale thing. So while in theory, you could say like, yeah, the responsibility goes on to the consumer because they're kind of folding the price into the price of goods. And so you pay more if you consume more. Honestly, we're not going to see consumer prices increase from this policy. But I think the point to be made is that consumers are already responsible, right, for what happens. We already do our best, a lot of us, to make sustainable purchasing choices. I know I try super hard, and it is still impossible to not end up with massive bins of recycling and waste that I can't control because there's no way for me to get all of my stuff without packaging, or maybe there's a way, but I can't afford it, and so I think what EPR does is it's not going to eliminate responsibility for consumers. It's also not going to increase their prices. What it's going to do is tie in producers for the first time into the equation. Right now, 100% of the responsibility is on individual consumers, taxpayers, and local governments. And it's just not fair, frankly. I hope that answered the question.
Thanks. Yes, and feel free if for the person that asked that to clarify in the chat if you had additional follow-ups. The next question related to the presentation is, do the fees charged to the producer by packaging type vary based on the environmental impacts of the materials used? Higher fees for styrofoam versus compostables?
Yes, 100%. The PRO will come up with its own exact fee structure. We're not putting fee numbers in statute. You don't want that because then they're kind of engraved in stone and really hard to change, and you have to reopen the whole law and it's a mess. But we do have a list of environmental criteria that the PRO must consider, and they're listed in order of priority, which we workshopped with the team, the committee. And so that is in there. And basically the PRO is going to have to propose a fee structure based on all those environmental criteria. And then again, get that approved by the agency before it can start charging fees.
Okay, thanks. And then we just had another question come in. Is the packaging producer the end retailer or the product manufacturer, or both? For example, when a big box store sells a bottle of cleaning products in the store, that's one layer of packaging. When the store ships an online order for the same bottle of cleaning product, that's an added layer. So do both of those layers need to buy in?
Yes, they do. The program will cover what we call primary, tertiary, and secondary, or primary, secondary, and tertiary, to go in order, packaging, which is basically primary packaging is what physically touches the product inside it. So like this tin of throat lozenges is touching the lozenges, and so that's like primary packaging. But if this came in a blister pack with like cardboard on the back and plastic on the front that you have to like saw through with a chainsaw to open, then that would be secondary packaging, and that would also have to pay in. And then if this was shipped in its blister pack and on a giant pallet with like 1,000 units, then all that shrink wrap and the pallets and all that stuff would also be, that's tertiary packaging, and that would pay in as well.
Okay, thanks. And then another question, I think we have time for maybe one or two more before we move to the next presentation. Do you expect, and this might be for any of the speakers, do you expect the federal Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act to be reintroduced this year?
Great question. The short answer is I did. I still kind of do. It's getting a little late, but I think yes. But I don't, like, let's be honest, I don't expect it to pass this year or next year or in the next 5 years. But you never know. You never know. We might get better at passing things through Congress one day. That would be super.
So do you believe it's the likelihood of non-passage is simply because of the quote dynamics of politics in the country today?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. EPR is often a bipartisan policy, frankly, because, well, for a lot of reasons, but I mean, certainly at the state level, we've seen bipartisan support for many EPR bills. So I don't think, I mean, I'll acknowledge that, like, when you look at the map of where EPR is at the state level, it's like concentrated more in blue states. I grant you that, but I do think that depending on the state, like, there's a lot of potential, but at the federal level, I don't think it's just like a partisan issue. But I do think it's just like the nature of the gridlock right now. I just don't think it's going to move. But I do hope it gets reintroduced again. And as I said, I think parts of it, like, I know parts of it have already kind of, I think there's an EPR study in the Clean Futures Act, for instance. So I think it's already kind of being broken up and turned into multiple bills, which could be a good thing.
Okay, thanks. And Mayor Burns, if you wanted to pass along, we can go to the next
Sure,
presentation.
Absolutely. Folks, we're going to go back to our friend Walter Willis from the Solid Waste Association of Lake County. And he has, of course, as he always does, more to say, but invaluable information to share. So he's going to tell us how to establish commercial hauling franchises and the pioneers doing this very thing in beautiful Lake County. So Walter, all yours.
Thanks again, Mayor Burns. This topic near and dear to my heart. These commercial franchises are not easy to implement, but as I go through this presentation, you'll see that they're very powerful and very business friendly. So next slide. So I'm going to go over what is it? What is commercial franchising, so you understand it? What are the pros? What are the cons? I'll give the cons a little time here, but I'm going to give you some legislative background. I've spent a lot of time with my lobbyists, and I've worked with the Illinois Municipal League and some of the COGs. They know me because we've had fights down there. They're trying to restrict our municipal franchising powers. When I say they, I mean the waste industry. So I'll talk about that, and I'll give you some final thoughts. So next slide. Real quick, who I am. I represent municipal government and county government. We've married the two. They don't often get married, but we did in Lake County. And we work well together since county has authority under state law to develop plans and implement them, but they really can't implement them without the municipalities on board. So you guys can read the rest of the slide. I'll move on. Commercial franchising, what is it? It's explicitly allowed under state statute. I've got a citation later on one of my slides that municipalities, separate from counties and townships, which have their own authorities, are granted authority to do it for both residential, and they use the term non-residential, which I take as business, commercial, and that's what it is. So we've got, of the 1,300 municipalities in the state, we only have 30 that I'm aware of that have commercial franchises. So it's not done very often. We've got 8 in Lake County. Northern Cook has quite a few as well. And those are the towns listed. You know, some of the key components, you know, what's this all about? When you hire one hauler, basically like you do with a residential franchise, to provide the services to your entire municipality. So you do that on the residential side, you can do the same thing on the commercial side. So what does that allow? When you do that, what does that allow? Well, it brings prices down significantly. And we know this for a fact, because in the contracts, if someone does have a lower rate than the franchise rate, they can freeze their rate for a year. And so we're able to track how many businesses actually had a lower rate, and it's less than 10% typically, and they get a freeze. So 90% of your business will save 25% or more. We're also able to embed in the cost of the garbage service free recycling. Recycling is not free. You know, the truck and the driver and the container and et cetera, all cost money. But we're able to get in some of the franchises, the earlier ones, we would have a yard and a half, you get a 95 or 65 one time a week, no extra charge. Opens the door to your recycle. More recent ones we've upped the ante. In fact, the haulers have during the bidding process, they've upped the ante and went from 1.5 to 4. Well, that gained a lot of favor and they won the contract. So we've got some like Gurnee that you can have up to a 4-yard container empty once a week and no extra charge. What does this do? It boosts your recycling participation. Without a franchise, we estimate anywhere from 15 to 25% of your businesses are recycling on their own because they wanted to. With the franchise, you're going to get past 50, and in some of mine, we're past 70% of the businesses have recycling service. And we have no environmental surcharges. If you look at a commercial sector bill, it's ridiculous what they put on. It actually adds 30%, some of the haulers. The average is about 18%. Call them environmental fees, contamination fees, fuel surcharges, all that stuff, not allowed at all explicitly under these contracts. And we've got food scrap pricing in all these contracts as well, to hopefully operationalize that one day. Next slide. So one of the common comments is, well, this is creating a monopoly, prices are going to go up, this is a bad idea. Well, we rebid these contracts have been around a while, just got a 5% decrease for Gurnee. Deerfield got a 1-year freeze on all their prices. Lake Bluff recently did one and got some of the best pricing in the entire state of Illinois. I think they do have the best pricing in the state of Illinois. So competition, even in these crazy times, well, inflation has obviously impacted things, but now I'll kind of jumping ahead here, but there's legislation was passed. It makes it much more cumbersome to develop a commercial franchise. You have to do a 3-year study, which I'll talk about real briefly, before you can even contemplate doing a commercial franchise. Years ago, you didn't have to do that. 7 of my members have done that. You have to pass an ordinance. You have to have reports every 6 months from the haulers. You have to put that on the website. It's very cumbersome. So Volo recently and Rowling Beach have made it through the process, as did Lake Bluff. They were the first one since 2014 to have a franchise. 8 years, the industry slowed me down with this legislation. So in Volo, what we'll do is we'll go to the town and say, oh, you're interested. Well, we got to work with your business community because they may not like this idea right off the bat, right? But if we show them significant cost savings, they may go, oh, I'm a business person. Garbage service is garbage service in some respects. I want to pay less. So in Volo, we just did this survey. 2-yarder is very common. 2-yarder once a week, 40% of your businesses probably have that. The average of the survey results, they were paying $135 a month for that service. We can get that in our franchises for $40. Those are the rates based on the average of 3 of our franchises. Let's go to the 4-yarder once a week. Very common. $432. Kind of some outliers there. We can get it for $66. You think that business is going to want to change? 6-yarder, same thing, $300 versus $95. 8-yarder once a week, $487 is what they're paying now. They could be paying $126 with franchise pricing. That's a powerful message. Now, what are the cons? Why wouldn't you do this? Come on, municipalities, this is easy. Well, it's not easy. The waste industry generally dislikes this. Prior to 2014, they hired consultants to track me around my municipalities. They did robocalls. They did everything. They actually came after my job. So they did not like this. And it takes significant effort. You have to do a 3-year study. You got to issue an RFP. You got to wait 15 months after you award the contract. Basically a 5-year commitment. A lot of mayors and city managers aren't into a 5-year, unless it's a significant development, et cetera. So, and you are going to run into potentially some of your businesses are going to say, what are you doing, government? Get out of my hair. I don't need you hiring my hauler for me. So you're going to hear that. So the legislative background, maybe I should put the slide sooner. Since 2008 through 2014, I had knockdown, drag out fights with the waste industry down there. I tried as hard as I could to get the municipalities to help defend these powers. And for a lot of the COGs did, the council's government. Some of you might remember this. In 2008, the first act was passed, 95-0856. That's where they basically said, hey, you got to do hearings, you got to let the haulers know, you got to give us a chance to come to your board meetings and put our case forward. We're going to make you wait 15 months after you award the franchise, if you make it through. And this whole idea of franchise fees, the waste industry felt that some municipalities, the fees were getting rather high. So they put a spotlight on those in the legislation. So we go to 2010 and then they're back. They're back down trying to take away municipal powers. I hope none of my hauler friends are on the call. Maybe they are. But in 2010, now we have to do an RFP. We don't have to do an RFP for a residential, nor does the waste industry really want that. They don't want us to go out and bid when they have a nice relationship with you, right? But on the commercial side, they do. For the very first time you do it, we have argued that your second or third time, you don't have to go to bid. You can do an informal process or extend or whatever. Put additional timelines in. I've created a whole table for my members that I'm going to show you. It's complicated. You got to have the hearings. You got to notice them. You got to make your decision within a certain amount of time. They made it very complicated. And then the final was in 2014. They had us on the ropes. You know, they could have taken this power away totally. But we fought hard and they compromised with us. And that's what led to the 3-year study. So you have to pass an ordinance proclaiming you're into a 3-year study. Every 6 months, the haulers have to report to you. And if they cannot demonstrate that 50% or more of your businesses are recycling voluntarily, then you can franchise. I've only had one town that went through the study that couldn't prove that. So this is a timeline that I give my members. You know, you guys can have it, but the first thing you do is you look your municipalities in the eye and say, this is not going to be easy. Are you in for this? City manager and mayor. Then you have to work with your business committee. We're not going to surprise anybody. We'll send out a letter. We'll do the survey. We're going to be transparent. We're going to go to bid without any commitment to doing anything until we see the numbers. And then we work our way through this complicated process. And ultimately you can award a contract like Bluff did a little over a year ago. So it's a 5-year effort. Next slide. I think I'm wrapping up here. These are my final thoughts. Okay. So if you're a mayor or a city council person or staff, these franchises will definitely save your businesses money. I can prove it. We've proven it. It's going to increase your recycling participation rates and the amount that's recycled. You're going to reduce greenhouse gases because you don't have multiple haulers driving around multiple places trying to pick up trash behind the back of a strip mall. There's got 5 different haulers back there. It's crazy, right? Road wear and tear, et cetera. They're successful after implementation. These are not monopolies. The haulers, these change hands and they're bid very competitively. It's very telling that once a town has done this, none of them have let them lapse. None of them. It's long, but it's worth it in the long run. And the one of my big motives was not only save money for businesses, but to do the recycling and then ultimately to get to the food scraps once that got on my radar about 8 years ago, whenever that was. So we really haven't had that much success, I'll be honest, in getting businesses to take that pricing and build a more dense route, because that's what it's all about with food scrap diversion and collection. The haulers are very unproductive. The cubic yards per hour they collect in that truck is not where it needs to be because they don't have route density. So that's the hope, is if you've got towns like Libertyville and Grace Lake and Highwood have a lot of restaurants, right? Why aren't they doing it? So that's the long-term goal. So hopefully I've got a couple of you guys excited to do this. I'll share my ordinances with you. I'll share my timelines with you. I love nothing better than to do commercial franchise.
Thank you, Walter. Questions for Mr. Willis, other than what's already been posted in the chat and responded to? Cheryl, are any good questions for our friend Walter?
Yes, let me get to the first chat question for his presentation was, if we have a long-term contract for residential services, does commercial franchising operate independently of said contract? Explaining more, could we go ahead and put out an RFP for a commercial franchising and have it operate on its own?
Yes, but you've got to do the 3-year study now. So I've got several towns that have their, like Highland Park and Highwood, have their residential and commercial under the same RFP. So I tell them, hey, you've got a nicer waste shed or income associated with your residential and your commercial, you're going to get better bids. So syncing up your contracts, you can do that. But you need to bid them separately because the powers are separate and the process is different. Residential, you don't have to do an RFP. The mayor could sit down with 4 different haulers and say, I like this one better. But anything you do, obviously, you need to be able to defend if you do an informal process. So commercial is complicated. Hopefully you got that from me because they changed the law on us 3 times. So.
Okay, thanks. And then we have another question. Someone has received significant pushback from one of the major haulers on providing waste hauler auditing data. Do you have any advice on getting them to give that data?
I don't know if I fully understand the question.
I guess, Marcella, if you wanted to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yeah, so, Oak Park has that ordinance that with the 3-year study on the books. And so I've been asking for the data. I have to admit it was from 2017 to 2020, which would be challenging, but I would settle for just 2020 to 2021. And one of the haulers, one of the big ones, just has, first they sent an email to someone else at the village, just basically refusing, saying it's not feasible, and they would have to pass costs on to consumers because of the depths of difficulty of doing this. In the meantime, I'm getting data from other smaller haulers, and then someone at the village had a conversation with their contact over there, and they said that, okay, basically, they said that we could give you some data. There will be liability statements all over it saying this is inaccurate, but it's a number that you can use. And so we said, okay, well, give us that, and they still haven't done it, and it's been about 2 weeks.
Well, you're dancing around naming who the company is, but they're probably one of the key proponents of the legislation that they're now having to deal with. So I'd tell them that, first of all, you're the guys that came up with this idea of a 3-year study and you reporting it. Now, the ordinance that I developed that my municipalities enacted had penalties. If you didn't report, that became an issue. We could start to fine you, and we would fine you for every day you were not reporting. And can they report? Yeah, I've had 7 of my towns do it. So they reported in Lake County. I don't know why Oak Park would be any different. So whoever that hauler is, they're probably doing it up here. So I don't know why they're not doing it for you. And I would look to your ordinance. And if you don't have penalties in it, well, I mean, ultimately go to your attorneys and say, if they're not responding, then we're not going to include them in the equation. And as long as we can defend that position 3 years later, without a hauler reporting to us, then we're going to go ahead and do our commercial franchising without that hauler reporting. But you need your attorney to kind of opine on that, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, okay, so you could just say, well, you're just not going to be part of the equation. I will say that I've gotten 2 private chats, and I believe that we're all having the same problem, the same hauler.
Who is it? Call them out.
I'll chat you privately. Since this is recorded.
I have no problem calling them out because that's the only thing that makes them change. I mean, whatever they're saying is just BS. You don't have to call them out, but it's not true.
Okay. Oh, interesting. It's someone else. It's a different supplier or call. Okay. So anyway, it seems like this is an issue that maybe we can all chat about offline about.
or give me a call. I mean, I don't know what ordinance you passed, but that lesson learned, if you do the 3-year study, put some serious penalties in there.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. And then it looks like Edith is wondering, Walter, if you could describe the ideal type of community to consider commercial hauling franchise.
I got all sorts that want to do it. Volo's got 77 businesses. Gurney had 700. I mean, the more businesses you have, probably the better. Would I advise you to maybe partner? I mean, I thought Legs Zurich was going to jump in with Volo, but they decided not to pursue it after doing the study. So I would say more businesses is better, but that would not stop me from, I'm not stopping in Volo with 70. I mean, let's see what happens.
Okay, thanks. And then we had an earlier question. This might be for any of the speakers. How will the rising price of oil help encourage plastic recycling?
Well, with HDPE at one time was worth as much as aluminum. So that kind of value, the haulers and everybody in the supply chain is going to try to grab that material. And that's why, you know, the PET bottle, the plastic bottle, and the HDPE milk jug are the highest recovered at 30% in the United States, which is not very good. But that high value definitely has the MRFs. They're off our back on contamination, let's be honest. 2 years ago, they were squawking at us. Now they're making so much money, they're like, oh, we'll deal with it. We don't like it, but we'll deal with it. But it's definitely helping the whole supply chain, and it's making our programs that'll keep the pressure down on our pricing with, you know, higher cost to collect. They got more revenue coming on the back end on the recycling. Just look at these publicly traded companies. They're making some serious money on their recycling right now. So.
Thanks. And then it looks like most of the other comments in the chat are comments, although there's one that maybe some of the speakers want to discuss. Claire from Kane County said pulping a box that has been used once to build a new box seems like a bigger circle than it needs to be. So if any of the speakers have comments on any of the other chat comments or this one, feel free to chime in.
I'll just say I agree. That's why I said the diagram's an oversimplification. Of course, it would be great to have things reused first, but it's just really hard to put it all onto a slide. So, but yes, I mean, totally agree.
So Sydney, on the reuse in our PPP legislation, did we spec an amount they'd have to put into that fund? Because we do want to get serious about refillables, reuse, etc. I can't remember if we put.
We did, the numbers are eluding me right now. It's something like, it steps up over time. So it's like a percentage of the overall fees that they raise has to go into the program, and then that increases.
I think Oregon's got like, is it 10 or 20 million that they're going to generate, and really, you know, it's going to take money to move the needle
Yeah.
on some of this reuse and get rid of single-use items. Like, so it's definitely something we're not ignoring in the legislation.
No, definitely not.
Okay, thanks. And it looks like we've got one last question in the chat. For any of the speakers, do you see RFID-based residential collection programs becoming more available as a pay-as-you-throw option? How might local governments incentivize the haulers to offer this practice? And if you just wanted to explain also RFID for anyone that might not know the acronym offhand.
It's a radio frequency something ID, I guess.
ID tag, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Highland Park has it where you don't have to buy stickers, right? They've got a reader on the truck. Every time they tip your garbage, it automatically sends a bill to your account. It's worked well in Highland Park. About 40% of the people in that town have pay-as-you-throw. The haulers absolutely hate it because it's very uncertain revenue, right? All of a sudden, I'm only putting out my can once every other week or once a month. Or in Highland Park, you've got some people that have to pay the base fee and they never put a can out somehow. But do I think that's the purest way to do it? Yeah, I do. But it's a bit of a battle with the haulers. And if you haven't done it before, what I would recommend, I've got in quite a few of my contracts, is you create the option for it. So like Green Oaks, if you live there, you can have regular subscription, or you can do the pay as you throw. So you make it an option and try to get your residents to move towards it. So it does work. The technology works. I think, was it Wheaton or somebody had the RFID charge on the recycling card too. I can't remember which town that was, but it makes a lot of sense. But there's a lot of people that don't pay their fair share on your repairs.
Okay, thanks. And then Mayor Burns, I'll turn it back to you. It looks like those are the only questions in the chat.
Excuse me, I have a quick question. I'm not sure how to phrase it in the chat. When we're discussing pay-as-you-throw models, are we talking about where haulers are essentially weighing the waste that they're collecting from the resident each week, or is it more of a structure? So in Winnetka, we have 3 options. We have a 35-gallon, a 65-gallon, and a 95-gallon. So is that the pay-as-you-throw model? I've been trying to read more about it, and I'm not sure when we're discussing it, which one it is.
Yeah, I'm liberal with my definition of pay-as-you-throw. It's none of it's weight-based, because that is proven not to work with scales staying calibrated. So it's all volume-based, right? Your 35-gallon cart, that's what Highland Park has. Every time you tip it, you get charged $3 or something like that. So as far as, different size cans, I think that's pay-as-you-throw, because you're incentivizing people to get a smaller garbage. Therefore, they're going to recycle more, as long as that delta in pricing is significant. A lot of times it's not. And even if you have a limited program where you have to sticker outside your can, even if it's a 95, I still consider that pay as you throw, because it's not unlimited. When I first came to Lake County, most of my towns had unlimited contracts. I'm like, that you're too lazy then. So let's get limited programs first. Let's get the graduated cans like you have, or let's do the pay as you throw each time you put a sticker on your cart, but none of it's weight based. It's all volume based.
And Walter, this is Chris. If I could add something onto that, I did drop a link in the chat for our pay-as-you-throw toolkit on EPA's website. The other thing I would mention is that you have a good recycling communication program, so that you don't get a lot of wish cycling. People that may want to avoid a charge, depending on how the program is set up, may recycle a little bit more than maybe the recycling program can handle, trying to keep things apart and out of that pay-as-you-throw system. So just one other thing to take a look at.
Thank you both. And I think the most valuable part of all these presentations we've had throughout the course of this Environment and Energy Committee is every presentation is online at the Mayor's Caucus website, so under the Environment Committee page. And I trust that all our speakers today, if they receive phone calls or inquiries from anyone participating this morning, or perhaps even checking it out, we'll be happy to help address those questions.
Yeah. I'm expecting a phone call from Oak Park. So.
Yeah, that'd be good. Make sure they call collect. So that'd be good. The next event, as mentioned earlier this morning, is this Thursday, St. Patty's Day, from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Central Time. It is the distribution of awards for the next cohort of our Soul Smart awardees. It also includes a tour of Argonne. Everything's being done virtually. I know Cheryl put in the chat the link earlier to register. Just a reminder to everyone who's interested in perhaps participating and seeing those 10 communities recognized. We invite you to do so. And of course, the next meeting of this committee is going to be held in late April. The exact date is to be determined, but the topic, how to develop a bike and pedestrian plan in your community. So we're looking forward to that discussion quite a bit. And again, we appreciate everyone's time this morning. Thank you for your continued engagement and your continued passion for all that we're trying to accomplish. With that, I bid you a happy Tuesday. Be careful. It is the Ides of March. Enjoy the remainder of your day. Thank you very much.